So I want to talk for a little bit about groups and performance. And when I say performance here, I'm talking a little bit about behaviors, what people do, and then the outcomes of those behaviors. So performance can really refer to both or a combination of the two. And as I've said before, the way people act and perform in teams and in groups is a little bit different from how they perform when they're by themselves. So what do I mean by that? Well, to start with, teams are more competitive than individuals. So the team as a group is more competitive than individuals. And that competitive nature of the team can really drive performance, right? And so we see this when we try to encourage esprit de corps and cohesion and a team to really want to work together and people to identify as being part of a team, because being part of that team can drive people to be more competitive and to drive them to want to do well on behalf of the team, not just for themselves, but actually drives their motivation through their identity with the team. Now, that said, team spirit can get out of control. And so as a leader, we need to be aware of that. In fact, people can get to the point where they may be willing to hurt members of an outgroup. And so they really need to balance the identities that are involved in that. Another aspect of team performance to be aware of is what we call process loss. So here's the thing: a team is greater than each of the individuals who are members of the team, but you're never going to be as good as maybe it could be, right? You never get to 100% efficiency on a team, right? So just like an engine can't ever achieve 100% efficiency because there's always some sort of loss, even at a theoretical level. So teammates have to communicate with each other. They have to talk about what's going to happen and interact with one another. That requires, and really that interaction does not lead directly to performance outcomes. So that's what we call a process loss, where we have some inefficiencies just due to the fact that people have to interact with each other. As a leader, it's often incumbent upon us to really minimize this process loss through procedures, through training, through team building, in order to help the team to work as well as possible. Another thing to remember about process loss is that it actually increases as group size increases. So really the advice on group size is your group should not be any bigger than it absolutely has to be. Because as it gets bigger, process loss increases and the team just becomes less efficient overall. Now, individuals will perform differently in a group, and we might look at two different aspects of performance here. Task performance, which is what you're doing on the actual job that you're trying to do, and then what we call contextual performance, where this is the stuff that's not necessarily related to the task, but really helps the team to operate. So let's look at task performance first. First, you have the idea of social facilitation. Oftentimes, we work harder when we know other people are watching, right? Because they have some expectation of us. Now, I say that, and I'll also add that this can actually be the opposite if we're worried about what people will think of what we're doing, right? So if we doubt our own abilities, we can be a little reticent to work harder because we're afraid of being found out. So there is some social inhibition as well, depending on our own confidence in our abilities. But that being said, this just further illustrates the point that a group of people will cause us to change our motivational behaviors. There's also the idea of social loafing that comes from a dispersion of responsibility. And many of you are familiar with this. We see this often in group projects where there is this kind of sucker effect where people are unwilling to work extra hard because somebody else is willing to work extra hard who really wants to get all the work done. You know what? Let them do all the work and I'll just take the credit for their work. Another thing that happens with individual performance in a group is competition. And particularly, like I said earlier, that teams are more competitive than individuals. Well, this will also drive people to work harder in order to achieve those team outcomes. And particularly, even at the individual level, if a person is outperformed by somebody who's in another group, particularly someone who's in a lower status group, and we're going to talk about what status differences are in groups, but particularly someone who's in a lower status group than my group, I am going to work harder if I'm being outperformed by them, right? And so we see this all the time in, for instance, Army-Navy competitions, where if we see somebody from a rival group from Army doing something a little bit harder, working better than we are, we're going to step up our game, right? Because we don't want to be outshone by this person who's not a member of our group. And so all these things are going to drive performance, right? And so this is, again, illustrating the point that people's performance at the individual level is different just because they're in a group or on a team. This also changes their contextual performance. You're going to have more willingness to help in-group members, and you're going to have a lower willingness to help out-group members, right? We talk about just helping people out and offering assistance. We also have this concept that's called vicarious retribution. And this is about being able to perform retribution on someone else in a different group whenever someone in their group has harmed someone else in my group, right? And so my classic example of this, frankly, is in baseball, where if a pitcher hits a batter, right? And so there's some grumbling and some argument about what happened there, and maybe they almost get in a fight or whatever else, and they don't. So pitcher hits a batter. Well, then what do we see? Those of you baseball fans know what's going to happen in the next half inning. The pitcher from that hit batsman is going to hit a different batter on that original team. Well, now you have two people who were not involved in the initial bit, right? And so that initial instance was two people. And then the retribution instance is two other people. Well, our theories of justice would say, I don't have the right to exhibit retribution upon you. You didn't do anything to me. But this idea of vicarious retribution is that when we're in a group, we feel justified in visiting retribution on a member of an out-group when that out-group has exhibited harm against a member of our in-group. So again, this just gets the idea that being in a group changes how we view the world, it changes how we operate with other people, and it changes how we act. Now, group size, I already alluded to this a little bit. Group size is going to have an impact on all of this stuff. So we're going to talk about, or we've talked about in other videos, social fault lines, the idea of subgroups. Those social fault lines will increase. The bigger a group is, the more likely subgroups are going to be created, and the stronger those subgroups, and even the more subgroups there will be. And part of that, right? So that's something that we have to be aware of. Leaders who are leaders of larger groups, they have a larger, what we call span of control. They lead more people. Are going to do more initiating structure behaviors than consideration behaviors. It's harder for leaders with larger spans of control to provide that individual consideration for each person, and there's a press upon them in order to initiate structure that's going to help the team operate. So group size actually affects the way leaders behave in this way. I already mentioned there's increased process loss with larger groups. There's decreased cohesion with larger groups, right? That goes back to the idea of additional social fault lines and subgroups created. And there is going to be an increased risk of social loafing due to dispersion of responsibility. So again, the advice is your group should be no bigger than it has to be in order to get the job done.